Well, good morning. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of you moms out there who decided that it's a little crazy out here in Houston and the storm that's coming through, and you decided to stay home. For all you who braved it, it's kind of fun, right? Yeah? You're driving over here, you're thinking, am I going to get wet? Am I not going to get wet? And then you pull in the parking lot and go, yeah, I'm going to get wet. This is a fun time for us to be a community. I've really been thinking and just reflecting on how awesome it is that we have that freedom to come in and be together, that we can share our faith openly with each other, that I know that if I reached out, I could reach out to any one of you today and say, I need prayer for this, and I know you would. I know you'd pray with me. I know that some of you who, if I'd asked you to come up here and pray right now, you go, oh, I don't really want to. But if I said, would you pray for me right now, you would. That's really awesome. And I don't want us to lose that. When I think about that presence of faith, I think about moms. And so I'm going to celebrate my mom today. She has been a constant presence of faithfulness in my life. In fact, even last week, I was talking to her, and there was a little question about this or that or what, and she reminded me, the Lord is more powerful than your decisions, and He will make it right, no matter what you choose. I thought, all right, Mom, there you go again, reminding me of God's faithfulness, which is something that she's done in her example and the way she has raised me. What a blessing. And I know that not everyone has that. So I give thanks for my mom. I give thanks for my sister. She has met challenges of motherhood. She has a daughter who graduated from college. So they're very thankful that they're not paying college bills. But they have a younger daughter who's Zach's age. Her name is Zoe. She has a whole host of challenges. So Zoe, in fact, she has so many labels that there really isn't a need to do the labels. Because Zoe, you just never know what's going on in her mind. You're not sure how much she takes, and every time you think she's not getting it, she surprises you with, she absolutely knows what you're saying. She was, and I think I've shared this before, Zoe wasn't supposed to be able to talk, walk, go to school. Well, she is on track to graduate from high school. She's doing the things with a lot of effort from my sister. So I give thanks for my sister, who I think is an incredible example of motherhood, with a child that does the normal track and a child that she does the Zoe track, and that's okay. And of course, for Sarah, I watch her doing the motherly duties day in and day out. Even this morning, she's making French toast, and she was doing it with joy because she got to do it for her children. And I think about how much love she shares, but not just for our kids, but obviously you see her every Sunday with these kids. And if you have a chance, if you just step into Travis Elementary, you'll see how she exemplifies caring for children. She loves God's creation, and she takes care of them and leads them. What an awesome thing that we get to celebrate today together, right? Now, you probably have a mom. Guess what? You all have moms. You may not all get along with your mom, but you still have a mom. Moms are great. So I hope that you can take some time today and just think about whether your mom is still alive or she's gone on, what wonderful presence she's had in your life. And if it was challenging, because that happens, right? Maybe through those challenges, you became a better mom. Or maybe you reflect and go, man, I wasn't that great of a mom. God pours grace upon you and reminds you where you could not do the things, he's filling in the gaps. Where you were not receiving things, he is there to fill in the gaps. He is asking you to come to him in all measures. And this morning, as we get into the story today, we're going to see a guy who his mom couldn't do it for him. The one thing he needed, his mom couldn't do. So in John chapter 9, as we begin, we're going to do our normal thing, or at least I'm trying to make it a normal thing. P-R-A-Y. So let's pause. Let's take a moment and take a deep breath in and breathe in the pneuma, the spirit, the ruach of God, and remind yourself that in the normal day-to-day activities of breathing, God's presence is with you. And let's breathe out and release the things that we came with that are disturbing to us, that are affecting our concentration on the Lord, and release them and know that the Lord has taken them. Where our burdens are heavy, he is taking them upon himself. And let's sit today and enjoy one another as we listen to his word. So let's go to R in reflection. We start in John chapter 9, starting in verse 1. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. So the very first verse that we read, as Jesus was walking along, or as he was walking along, this means that Jesus' ministry was very purposeful and powerful at the same time. So Jesus didn't just assign himself that when he would go to temple, that's where he would do the work of God. He didn't just assign himself that when the disciples at the hour of 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, that's when he's going to do the work that the Father had sent him for. As he's walking along, in Greek, that means as he's doing life. I mean, it literally means he was walking. But there's a symbolism within that phrase that means as he's doing life. And that is also for his disciples. They were literally behind him, walking with him, experiencing life with Jesus. One of the things when you talk about a rabbinical or rabbi model is that the disciples would capture what the rabbi was doing by actually receiving the dust from his feet. Meaning, as he walks along, the dust behind him would fall upon them, and they would receive the things that he does. That's what a disciple does. You try to keep up with the rabbi so you can see what he does so that you could do those same things. So the disciples are walking with him, and as they walk through this process of going from town to village, they walk by a guy who's blind. And they have a question. And this kind of gives you a little bit of a picture of what this life looked like, is that this is a lot of small communities. It wasn't, when you walk by someone in Houston, now sometimes it's kind of fun, actually, because Houston is this super large city, but it's like little small towns within the super large city, and you sometimes know a lot more people than you think. But on a normal basis, if you just walk outside and you walk by someone, you have no idea, did they just move here last week? Did they, are they just passing through? Are they visiting? Have they been here forever? But for some reason, and partly because These were small villages where people had connections to each other. They knew this man was blind from birth. This was not an uncommon, they knew who this guy was. And they're walking by, and there was, this is part of the history of this. The culture would often see that if you had a problem with yourself, so if you developed a limp, well, there's some kind of sin that occurred. If you became blind, something that you did. Now, I actually think this is we think that that's all back then, but we still do this in parenting. We tell our kids, if you keep doing that, you're going to, right? Somehow there's going to be something bad that happens to you. You keep lying, and your tongue's going to fall out, right? You keep, these little things that I think I had this infatuation with playing with toads, and I think this is a common thing. Maybe it's just a Nebraska thing, but my mom would say, you keep playing with those and you're going to get warts. And I was like the toad? They have those. And I did hesitate for a moment, but I kept playing with the toads. So these things we kind of keep up with, if we want to divert someone from doing a certain activity, we give them a warning that something bad is going to happen. Now, there are natural consequences to our actions, right? If you keep drinking and you drink alcohol in the morning, in mid-morning, and then before lunch, and then right after lunch, and then at the 1 o'clock hour, and then you have a little quick before happy hour, and then you have happy hour. If you drink like that, most people are going to get cirrhosis of the liver. That's a consequence. And they can kind of scientifically look at this and say, this will develop. Smoking. They seem to have a lot of evidence that would point that most people, if you smoke all the time, you have a pretty good chance of getting lung cancer or cancer of the esophagus or a whole multitude of cancers, right? If you eat candy all day long, you might gain weight. Might be a thing. Or you might get diabetes. Or you might, those are some things that are natural consequences. And so for the disciples, they weren't necessarily thinking that kind of natural consequence. They were thinking what in their culture would have been, wow, his mom and dad must have been really bad sinners. For him to get blinded by birth because he wouldn't have been able to have any action toward that blindness. Because he was already hit with the judgment of God before he was even born. What would he have done, Jesus? And I thought about this. Sometimes we think that we don't think this archaically ourselves, but maybe we do. When someone gets something that happens to them, we sometimes think, is God punishing them? Or maybe when something bad happens to us, we think back, did I do something to deserve this? This particular thing that occurred. And I think that big question hits us because we ask, why do bad things happen to good people? Have you heard that? Have you thought that? I mean, this is legit. Have you thought that? I mean, you think like a newly married couple, things seem to be going great. They get pregnant, and then the baby's stillborn. Well, back in the day, they would have said, there must have been a bad sin that occurred in their life. God is punishing them for that. Or this kid that's doing great, seems like he's excelling in all things, is in a car accident. There must have been something in his family origin that God was punishing them for that. The problem is that the problem with that question, why do bad things happen to good people, is that it really has a big false statement. Does anyone know what the false statement is? Why do what? Why do good things happen to bad people? Well, the false part is that good people. I know we don't like to say that because that means we have to call ourselves this thing called sinners. And then all of a sudden, the person who's committed some sin that we think is horrendous, we actually have to step in that and go, I'm no better than that person. I can't call myself good out of my own power. I'm a sinner. We just went through confession and absolution. I'm sinful at birth. Why do bad things happen? Well, this world is full of a lot of things called sin. Some of it we participate in. And the sooner we own up to that, the better, right? The actions I take do influence other things for other people. So if I choose to speed in my car and I wreck, that action does or could influence someone else. Sin is real and it has a huge effect. And it's not just our actions. The moment Adam and Eve chose to depart from the Father and choose their own way, to seek independence from the Father who said, the garden is yours. But they chose a different direction. The moment that occurred, the world started to destroy itself. Why do we see these horrendous storms? Because the world is full of sin. Why do we see bad things happen? Because the world is full of sin. So why do we pray for Jesus to come soon? Because he's the only one that can make that all right. Sadness, tears, death, destruction, we can't stop that. I know we wish we could. Wouldn't it be great to just go, if I stop sinning, there will be no more cancer? That'd be great, right? Don't put your faith in me. I'm probably going to sin as soon as I walk out that door. I might be sinning as I'm sitting here. I'd rather put my faith in Jesus who didn't sin, who kept himself apart from sin, but was willing to take on all sin so that one day we could be free. Jesus is stepping into this for us. And he's stepping into it for this man as well. The viewpoint of the disciples was that there was a direct linkage and there was a punishment that God held on to, that there was a vengeful God that was waiting to zap you because he held on to sins that you did, and he was just waiting for the right moment to hit you. Here's a bad view of my parenting. So I play a game called Repeat with my kids, especially with Zach. If Zach comes up to me and he hits me like that, I go, repeat, and I hit him harder. If he whaps me on the back of my head, I go, you want to play repeat? And I whap him on the back of his head. That's what we do. So, repeat is a way to remind them, you want to play the game's going to get intense. That's not what the Father does. That's not what God says. I'm going to, Oscar, you sinned? You're going to pay for that one. He doesn't look for a way to destroy you. The story of God is He has always looked for a way to restore you, not destroy you. He looks at those circumstances when you feel your life has been destroyed because tragedy has entered, and He is looking for a way to restore you, even in the midst of that. That's why He sent His Son in the midst of a world who said, God, we don't even know who you are. We don't know who the Messiah is. Jesus appears, and they could not even see Him as the Savior. They said, He's a carpenter's son. Go back to Nazareth. What good could come out of Nazareth? And yet God looked at this world, looked at you. He looked into the future and saw you. He saw the depravity that we would be in. He saw today. He saw flooding that was going to be occurring in the city. He saw people who may lose some power. He saw all these things that were occurring today. And He said, I will send my Son to give hope. I will send my Son to restore. I will send my Son to heal. I'll send my Son because I want to see all of these people, all of my children with me someday. He's not the one to destroy. He is the one that steps into sin's face and says, I'm going to restore. The Apostle Paul says it this way, what shall we say about such wonderful things as these? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Since He did not spare even His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, won't He also give us everything else? Who dares accuse us whom God has chosen for His own? No one, for God Himself has given us right standing, has made us righteous, has cleansed us with Himself. Who then will condemn us? No one. For Christ Jesus died for us and was raised to life for us. And He is sitting in the place of honor at God's right hand, pleading for us. Get that picture in your mind. This isn't a picture of a God who holds on to a sin that Yvonne did yesterday and devises a plan to punish her. This is a God who has been for us from the very beginning and will not stop and will even give up His own Son in the name of being for us. So, as you walked in this morning or as you're listening online, here's a question for you to reflect on. Do you think that God is for you or against you? And of course, on a Sunday morning at 10:50, hoping the sermon doesn't go forever, you say, Jesus is for us. But as we went into the confession, Rob hit a great message of, what about those times when maybe you question? I think about Rob's wife, Carrie, who had an accident. It might have been a little tough. I'm not speaking for Carrie. So Carrie, if you're listening, I'm not speaking for you. Little disclaimer. But it might have been a little tough when she was in the parking lot and she had several bones broken to go, God is for me. I don't think she said that, did you? Okay. It might be a little tough when you go to the doctor and you get a diagnosis of cancer to say, God is for me. It might be a little tough when you've had a relationship and you don't know why it is crumbling to go, God is for me. It might be a little tough when you thought you raised your kid in the ways of Jesus, but they can't profess faith today to say, God is for me. And that is why we come back together to encourage one another and remind each other that even in those times of blindness, of destruction, of death, of sadness, of loneliness, that God didn't even spare his own son because he is for you. So then Jesus spit on the ground. He made mud with saliva and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this a man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, oh no, he just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I'm the same one. They asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. I don't know, he replied. We really don't want to believe. I will say this. Many times we don't want to believe that God is actually for us. Sometimes we don't want to believe that God is for others. Sometimes people receive things that are too hard for us to believe that God would grant that to them. Sometimes we'd rather make up our own stories rather than let God's story be revealed in us. Sometimes we choose not to see Jesus. So how often, next question, we're moving right along now because I don't want you guys here all day. This is a long chapter. How often do you choose not to see Jesus? Think about you being in this crowd. It struck me just as I was reading through this. I didn't have this planned in my sermon, but it struck me that this guy doesn't even have a name. They all knew him. Oh, this hurts. They all knew him, but they didn't care enough to know his name. He's just the blind beggar. He's just the guy who keeps on begging, and his parents did some awful sin. That's why he's blind. That's why he's all messed up. If his parents wouldn't have done that, he would have been fine. He could have been just okay. So we don't want any part of him, but we all know him. We can all point to him. We all know he's blind from birth. Some of them don't want that reality changed, so they go, no, he just looks like him. That can't be him. No one can change that reality. How often do we not see Jesus in something that we need healing in? We don't think he'll show up. How often do we have a friend who really needs Jesus and we don't think Jesus will show up for that friend? How often do you choose not to see Jesus? Verse 13, then they took the man. These are the people around him, the people who can't even give him a name. They took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees because it was the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it, so he told them, he put the mud on my eyes, then washed it away. I could see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man Jesus is not from God, for he is working on the Sabbath. Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs. So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, "What's your opinion about this man who healed you?" The man replied, "I think he must be a prophet." The Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man who had been blind and could now see, so he called in his parents. Oh, this man was a grown adult. It's not like this is a 5-year-old being healed. But the division that occurred was because it didn't fit their nicely packed reality. How could God do something on the Sabbath? How could a guy be healed and restored and break the law, God's law? They chose to be angry instead of rejoice that someone who had been blind for such a long time could now see. So the question, when do you miss the opportunity to praise because you're looking for problems? I know a lot of individuals that they've been praying for something for a long time. In fact, and I shouldn't say I know a lot of individuals. How about I know myself? You've been praying for something for a long time, and then you actually get it, and then you forget that you've been praying for it for a long time, and it doesn't come to you exactly how you thought it would, but it's there. And instead of rejoicing and thanking God for what happened, you go, yeah, but. How many yeah, buts do you do in your life? Yeah, God, you did that, but. You pray for transportation. I mean, I should not do this. I'll probably get in trouble. My daughter really wanted a car, and we drove past this one car to drop Sarah off at work all the time. And then this man had a little for sale sign on this 2000 4Runner. So Sarah and I stopped, talked to the guy, and we got her a car. And she really wanted a car. Yeah, but. And I won't put that on Breezy, because we do this in spades. We ask for, I need a little more money, and we don't even realize when a little more money comes. We've already spent it on something else. We want to have a restored family, and we don't even realize that God's already in the working of bringing the family back together. Or we get a phone call from a family member that we don't want to talk to when we've been praying for a restored family. We want restored health, and we get healed, and then we go, yeah, but my leg hurts now. That's who we are. This is what the Israelites did. They wanted freedom. They prayed for freedom. For a couple centuries, they prayed for freedom. And then God said, Moses opens up the Red Sea. It's freedom. Miraculous freedom. You were a slave, and now you can walk through. And they looked back and said, we'd rather go back there. That's what we do. I'd rather be in shackles and in chains doing what I know than walking into the freedom that God wants to give. We miss the opportunity to praise because we're looking for all the problems. Verse 19, they asked them, is this your son? Talking to the parents, getting back to the story here. Was he born blind? If so, how can he see now?" His parents replied, "We know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, "He's old enough, ask him." This sounds a little petty on their part. However, this is a huge cultural thing. Remember, this is a small town. So imagine us being a town. This is the center where you conduct business. This is the place that you live. This is your provision. So if I was a bricklayer, for instance, which is a stretch, but if I had that talent, if you expel me from the synagogue, that means none of you can have me lay bricks for you. Where do I go? This is all I know. Am I going to pack my bags and walk to another neighboring village where I have no land, no home, no place, no family? Family was huge connections. They were the only place where you could get land, inheritance, provision. People depended on one another. It wasn't our society where we just go, independence, I'm going to go do my own thing. It was, hey, mom and dad secured a place. That's my inheritance. This is what we keep growing and developing. My dad was a bricklayer. Now I'm a bricklayer, but now I'm expelled. Where do I go? It means I can't see my family again. They have to shun me as well. It's huge implications. So you bet those parents were like, we don't want to ruin this, because not only will we ruin it for us, our son's almost ruined it for himself by being healed. Oh my gosh. But they also didn't want to believe that the same man who healed their son, something that most parents would have dropped down in tears, which maybe they already did, in thankfulness that someone they dearly loved had been healed. They were not willing to put their lives in the hands of the man who could heal their son who was born blind. They were more scared of everyone else than the one who could heal someone who was born blind. We're 2,000 years past this event. We still can't do that. No science, no technology. Now they're trying. But if you're born blind, you're born blind. And there's really no hope for you. How often do you hesitate to put your life in the hands of Jesus? Think about this in day-to-day decisions. The parents didn't know that Jesus would die on the cross and rise again and ascend into heaven and make a promise to come back. We know that. And still, do you hesitate to say, if you're my Lord, if you're for me and not against me, why the heck do I have anxiety over life-to-life decisions? Why am I worried about this? Why am I allowing the world to crush me when you're for me? Of course you'll provide for me. You're for me. You would not, how about I start that again? You wouldn't even spare your own son because you're so for me. But I hesitate to put my life in your hands. Verse 24. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man, Jesus, is a sinner. That's a little ironic. I don't know whether he's a sinner, the man replied, but I know this. I was blind, and now I can see. But what did he do? They asked. How did he heal you? Look, the man explained, I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become one of his disciples too? Then they cursed him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from? We know God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. We can say that's true yet today. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. You were born a total sinner. Which they could have replied, and you were too. But he didn't. You were born a total sinner, they answered. Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue. This man no longer can be a part of that culture. But pride really does take a toll on us, doesn't it? That moment when you just believe you have to be right. We don't have anybody in here except for me, right, on that? Oh, I see people looking at each other right now. That's a little bit of conviction right there, huh? When you just know you're right, and boy, you're going to fight because you're right. And that other person's wrong, and until they admit that they're really wrong, you're going to keep telling them that you're right. And it is so embarrassing when you find out that you're wrong, that you just hope the whole argument goes away. Oh, well, I see something here. I don't know how many times. It's really embarrassing when it's your children who go, you're wrong. And you go, I'm not wrong. You've lived, 16 years? And then you go, I guess I was wrong. Sorry about that. Pride. That's what the Pharisees and even the people of the village are dealing with. It doesn't fit in their theological framework. They know the right answer. They know that what occurred here obviously occurred. They have witnesses that this guy was born blind. And now they have witnesses that he can see. They see that he can see. They know in their theological framework, no one can do this except by the hand and blessing of God. But they don't want to believe it. Their anger and pride blinds them from seeing Jesus. So what cultural issues are you aware of that you've ignored what God says and instead gone with what your neighbor says? This is what's happening in this story. There are so many things that we look at today, and our viewpoints are shaped. How many of those are shaped by what God says to us? And how many of those are shaped by what our neighbor has said? Or whatever program we're watching on TV? Or an experience that we had? What happens when we don't let God shape the way we see life? When we subtract the lens of Jesus from our life, is that we miss a lot of stuff. And we'll often fall on the side of pride and being wrong, instead of falling into seeing the life and walking behind the footsteps of Jesus and being his disciple. How many cultural issues have you just decided, I know the Bible says this, but it's easier to believe this. Done. I'm going to ignore it. Verse 35, when Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? Now, this is a title of the Messiah, of the one to come. So this man, being of Jewish culture, this would not have been just like, do you believe in the Son of Man? He would have heard, oh, he's calling himself the Messiah. The man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. You have seen him. I love this story. Jesus said, I am he speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said. And he worshiped Jesus. Now this is just one verse in this story, but this one verse would encapsulate some time. It doesn't go as fast as you read it. The man in a matter of hours has been able to physically see, and in this moment, he's spiritually seeing for the first time. Then Jesus told him, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. Some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, which I think isn't this amazing? They hate Jesus. They now have expelled this man from their life, but they still stick around. Why? Because that's what anger does. You just can't let go. Are you saying we're blind? If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty, Jesus replied. But you remain guilty because you claim you cannot see. This goes to the very beginning. Why do bad things happen to good people? We're all blind. And we need Jesus to heal us. And if we don't think that we're blind, we fall into the camp that we don't need Jesus. I hope that you fall into the camp of saying, I need him. My actions in day-to-day life, I need him. I need him. The last question, do you believe? I love in this story that Jesus hears what happens to this guy that he healed. He hears about the confrontation between the Pharisees and this guy's parents. He hears that he's been expelled from the synagogue, from life in that village, in the village he grew up in, and begged, even though no one seems to know his name. And what Jesus does, this is the character of God. He goes and finds him. That's who our God is. He doesn't just heal you. He doesn't just restore you. He doesn't just love you from a distance, but he sees when you're hurt and expelled, and he goes and he finds you. He finds you. How do we get that today? Well, in those moments where you're doubting and you're rejecting, and then in a moment of peace, you feel the presence of God, that's Jesus finding you. In the moment that you're doubting that he'll do anything, and then all of a sudden he does, that's Jesus finding you. constantly, day by day, looking for you. In those moments when you've made choices that have separated you as far as the east is from the west, from God, he finds you because he's claimed you. And he does not want to let go. This morning, Jesus is coming to you and he's asking this question: do you believe in me? Are you willing to put your life in my hands? Are you willing to believe that I am a God that is for you, not against you? Are you willing to believe that if I can heal you, number one, I can heal you, that I will always be for you? So, do you believe that Jesus can do the impossible? Not just for you, but for the person that you've seen, that you just don't know how they'll ever be made better. Do you believe that only Jesus can save you? Do you believe that he actually came to save bad people and that you're one of them? Do you believe that what he did on the cross was enough to cover those sins that you committed that still linger with you in your distant memory or in your present memory? That's enough to cover that too. Do you believe that Jesus rose again, defeating death and the devil? Do you believe that he'll come again, so that all these things that are broken around us will be restored? That's what he's saying to this guy when he says, the Son of Man has come. Do we believe that Jesus is at work accomplishing all these things? From the very little thing that you pray for, my foot hurts, so Lord, I'm praying that you heal my foot. Or when we hear a kid go and you say, does anyone have any prayers? Some, heavy things, and they go, my pet, Sniffy, has a sniffle, Can we pray for my dog who seems to have a cold? It's hard for me to really care. I'll just be honest. But I know God does. And so I have to step back and go, what's the amazing compassion of our God, who cares about an ingrown toenail or a broken leg or cancer or an early death of a loved one? How can he fit all that in to his heart? Thank God he came for me. Thank God he sees me. Thank God he came and found me.